Hello everyone, today we will talk about the Battle of Chosun in detail, and discuss the consequences of the Korean War in an objective manner that is neither black nor bragging, whether it will bring peace to the People's Republic of China for decades, or endless troubles. To examine history objectively, it is necessary to review the records of both warring parties at the same time and make comparisons and verifications. In the modern history of China, whenever the war history documents of the two warring parties are compared, people are often amazed at the huge difference. The Battle of Chosun also has a place in the history of the US military, and it is one of the most difficult tasks completed in the history of the US military. For the Chinese Communist Party, it was a surprise attack and annihilation mission, but for the US military, it was a breakout and rescue mission. The American public television station PBS has a documentary, Battle of Chosun, interviewing a group of veterans of the 1st Division of the Marine Corps who are still alive, and strung together this story from the perspective of witnesses. This is a characteristic of Western society when it comes to examining history after the rise of mass media. It is no longer telling history from the perspective of heroes, but telling history from the perspective of ordinary witnesses and frontline soldiers. Moreover, Western academic circles and folk-free research on history have long had a mature atmosphere. So the revelation of the war is more three-dimensional and comprehensive. In the American narrative, the battle process is generally like this. Changjin Lake Reservoir is located on the northeast side of the Korean peninsula, close to the Sea of Japan, north of Pyongyang and Wonsan. Before the CCP's Volunteer Army, actually a regular army, launched a surprise attack on the US Army, the Korean People's Army was in a state of complete collapse and retreated towards the Yalu River on the Sino-North Korean border. MacArthur, the commander of the United Nations Army, intended to completely eliminate North Korea's armed forces before Christmas. The US government, the top leaders also tend to win an all-round victory. As for whether the former North Korean control area will be occupied by the United Nations after the victory, or whether it will be directly taken over by the Syngman Rhee regime of the Republic of Korea, it was not on the agenda at that time, but if the Soviet Union and the CCP intervention in the war, of course, was also excluded from the post-war political program. The US Army's main force, the 10th Army, was scattered on the Eastern Front in Korea, spread over a 400-mile front. Moreover, the US intelligence agency has obtained information about the buildup of the Chinese Communist Army in Manchuria, and warned MacArthur. MacArthur still asked the troops to speed up and not slow down. General Edward Armand, Lieutenant General, the commander of the 10th Army, supported MacArthur's judgment. He believed that the scale of the CCP's intervention would not change the situation of the war. But the commanders at the division level held a different view. It was the prudence of General Smith, the commander of the 1st Marine Division, that saved the lives of most of the officers and soldiers of the division. Before the launch of the Changjin Lake battle on November 27, more than 15,000 troops of the 1st Marine Division under the command of General Smith were distributed on the supply line of more than 80 miles from south to north in Changjin Lake. 3,600 men, including the division headquarters, were stationed at Changjin at the southern end of the reservoir, a decisive location in the campaign. The main force of the division, 8,000 Marines, is stationed in Liutanli in the northwest of the reservoir, preparing to advance northward from here. In addition, about 2,500 officers and soldiers of the 7th Infantry Division of the Army and hundreds of South Korean soldiers were stationed on the east side of the reservoir as a flank cover force. This is the Polar Bear Regiment that the CCP said has been wiped out. In fact, they were not the main target in the Volunteer Army's war. Mao Zedong's first goal was to wipe out the 1st Marine Corps Division, and the Polar Bear Regiment was a cover division. After the start of the battle, a small number of mixed troops composed of British and American troops went north to support, together with the input of air power, the 5th Air Battalion, the 33rd Air Battalion of the Marine Corps, and the carrier-based aircraft formation belonging to the 7th Fleet of the Navy. This is the entire combat force of the United Nations Army in the battle, no more than 30,000 people. In the first few days, the Chinese Communist volunteers invested about 60,000 troops from the 9th Corps, and there will be more in the future. General Smith's caution is that he did not advance as fast as MacArthur requested. If his forces were scattered for dozens of miles, it would be fatal. He still retained about one regiment of troops in Changjin, where the division headquarters was located. and deployed a small detachment of 400 people between Liutanli, the main force, and the division headquarters, Xiajiayuli, stationed on the high ground beside the highway, protect the safety of the traffic line between the main force and the division headquarters. This place is called Dokdong Pass, and it proved to be very important afterwards. Another foresight of General Smith was to build an airstrip at the headquarters of the Xiajiayuli division, instead of relying on trucks for land transportation. It is also vital in battle to remove the wounded and bring supplies in the cold. The logic of the battle process is very simple. The volunteer army first wanted to annihilate the main force of the 1st Marine Division in Liutanli, northwest of the reservoir, and then attack the division headquarters in Xiajiayuli to the south of the reservoir in a roundabout way, trying to cut off the passage of the 1st Marine Division going south. After taking heavy casualties, neither objective was achieved. General Smith's purpose was very simple: to shrink and gather the scattered troops, and then withdraw together to Hamhung Port, 80 miles away, to the south by boat, and send the wounded to Japan. Therefore, the main force in Liutanli, northwest of the reservoir, fought and retreated. Here we are going to talk about the detachment at the Dedong Mountain Pass. If there is no such link, the volunteers will occupy this highland in a detour, and the passage between the main force of the 1st Marine Division and the division headquarters will be cut off. The F Company of the 7th Marine Regiment here, under the continuous attack of the 59th Division of the 20th Army of the Volunteer Army, managed to hold on for 5 days, and made great contributions to the retreat of the American troops in Liutanli. Of course, it was successfully defended with the artillery support of the Southern Division headquarters, the support of naval aircraft, and the use of favorable terrain, but a company withstood the continuous attacks of a division, and the combat power of the US military was impressive. The 31st Regiment of the Army to the east of the reservoir suffered even greater losses. Out of the 2,500 troops, 1,050 successfully broke through and went south, with more than half of the battle losses. Once the scattered troops on the east and west sides of the reservoir are withdrawn, and the Marine Division joins forces, it will not help if the number of volunteers is several times higher. So after that, the process of retreating to Hamhung Port was relatively smooth, and 90,000 North Korean refugees were also taken away. Wikipedia says that the Battle of Changjin Lake lasted from November 26 to December 13. In fact, the main offensive of the 9th Corps of the Volunteer Army was launched on the night of November 27, and the main battle lasted about 10 days. Looking back at the campaign, it doesn't make sense strategically that MacArthur was completely surprised. He really has to bear the responsibility for improper command. He is really arrogant and underestimates the enemy. He looks down on the CCP army very much, and regards it as a peasant army that is not even an amateur. After the 1st Marine Division was attacked on the night of November 27, General Armand, the commander of the 10th Army, took a helicopter to Xiajiayuli early the next morning. During the resident inspection of the 1st Marine Division, General Smith presented a request to retreat. Lieutenant General Armand satirized him and said, "Are you going to be intimidated by some laundry workers?" At that time, the main jobs of the Chinese in the United States were either running a grocery store or running a laundry, so it can also be seen that the high-level US military despises the Chinese. MacArthur and Armand's contempt for the CCP's military capabilities was indeed understood by Mao Zedong and used. On November 26, the 9th Corps of the Volunteer Army only had a preliminary exchange of fire with the 1st Marine Division, and immediately retreated to hide. This conveyed to the arrogant MacArthur the impression that the CCP was just bluffing, but it was just trying to slow down my actions, and I wanted to speed up instead. Mao Zedong and Peng Dehuai grasped MacArthur's mentality and wanted to induce the US military to further disperse and march northward alone, so as to encircle and wipe them all at once. General Smith's caution was a blessing to the officers and soldiers of the entire division. The United Nations had no choice but to retreat to the south of the 38th parallel and adjust the front line. Strategically, MacArthur lost a game. But it is hard to say that Mao Zedong won, and his goal was only partially achieved. The goal of the first campaign and second campaign he launched was not only to save the current crisis of the Kim Il-sung regime, but also to annihilate the vital forces of the US military and deal a heavy psychological blow to the Americans. But no matter whether it is on the Changjin Lake on the Eastern Front or on the Western Front, the sum is far from achieving the goal of annihilating the two full-scale divisions of the US military. Moreover, the volunteers paid a very heavy price, which exceeded Mao's expectations. In Mao's telegram to the 20th Army, he also admitted that he had learned a lot and hurt his vitality. The manuscript of this telegram is available online. The 1st Marine Division demonstrated extremely high combat literacy when it was attacked by surprise. During the fierce battle in Liutanli, the US troops were infiltrated many times by the volunteers, and they ran behind the US troops and opened fire. However, the US troops did not panic and did not give up their positions to escape. Of the more than 15,000 troops of the 1st Marine Division, nearly 14,000 were withdrawn. Among them were 4,000 wounded, all transported to Japanese hospitals by transport plane, and finally took away 90,000 North Korean refugees. Probably after Zhu Zhiliang lost the Jiating, Zhao Yun covered the retreat of the main force of the Shu army, and Zhao Yun's record would not be better than that of General Smith in Changjin Lake. The 1st Marine Division has indeed created a miracle. It is worth making a movie. But instead, the CCP made a blockbuster film to expose its mistakes, which is really ironic when you think about it. What are the consequences of the CCP's participation in the war in North Korea? While the Battle of Changjin Lake was still in progress, the US government convened a meeting of industry leaders in New York to redirect US industry to military orientation. The establishment of a huge standing army in an era of peace is unprecedented in American history, and it is a major turning point in history. The CCP's participation in the war made the US government feel the urgent risk of a direct, all-out war with the communist camp. For the first time, the US government proposed a massive nuclear retaliation strategy, but don't be misled by the words. What he said was not that the United States was first attacked by nuclear weapons and then retaliated on a large scale. At that time, the Soviet Union had just tested the atomic bomb, and its nuclear weapon capability was still insignificant. It was said that after the United States suffered a large-scale conventional attack, it would use nuclear weapons to retaliate on a large scale to quickly eliminate the enemy's military potential. This massive nuclear retaliation is a plan to actively use nuclear weapons on a large scale. He was the mainstream war thought of the United States throughout the 1950s, which was stimulated by the CCP's unexpected dispatch of troops to North Korea. For China, the United Nations Resolution 500 in 1951 imposed an embargo on mainland China and North Korea. It has made it difficult for China to import industrial materials such as steel and machinery and equipment, which has greatly hindered China's industrialization process. Based on his experience in resisting the blockade of the Kuomintang and the Japanese army during the War of Resistance, Mao Zedong launched the Great Production Movement, version 2.0, which is the Great Leap Forward and the Great Iron and Steel Smelting, to solve the problem of shortage of industrial raw materials, resulting in disastrous consequences. After the Sino-US relations were normalized, the first thing the CCP government did was to import machinery and equipment from the United States. In 1980, the scale of China's imports from the United States was twice that of 1972. Judging from the tightness of the CCP's foreign exchange at that time, it can be seen that it is eager for American machinery and equipment. Before accepting Mao Zedong's appointment, Peng Dehuai once said that this battle might delay China's liberation by decades. Putting aside the word liberation, Peng Dehuai was right in terms of China's industrialization process. Does the US military have plans to further invade China? The declassified National Security Council document numbered NSC 81/1 shows that the United States has no plans to invade China. It is required that only South Korean troops be used on the border between the Soviet Union and North Korea or between China and North Korea. If Soviet or Chinese troops are found to enter North Korea on a large scale, ground operations north of the 38th parallel should be avoided. UN Security Council Resolution No. 84, the formation of the United Nations Army, only aimed at the incidents on the Korean Peninsula, and did not authorize him to expand the war to China. As the sponsor of the United Nations, the United States has absolutely no intention of dismantling this new institution after a few years of its establishment. Presidents Truman and Eisenhower highly had no desire to go beyond the mandate of the United Nations. The so-called defense of the family and the country is indeed untenable. Therefore, the reason for justifying the Korean War has become unfounded. It can only start from a very vague possibility, saying that China has lost its buffer space. The result of the fact is that China's industrialization was seriously delayed, and it led to disasters like the Great Leap Forward. What is right and what is wrong, everyone can judge for themselves.